I discovered the 7 secret wars where a football club had to fire their superstar or sack their manager. The 5th one will shock you, but the final forced choice is happening right now. Stick to the end to hear which iconic manager is about to be sacrificed. The tension inside a football club often begins quietly, like a thin crack spreading across a wall, barely noticeable at first, but destined to tear the structure apart if ignored. Sometimes the storm comes in silence. Like what happened when Robert Lewandowski walked away from the Poland national team after a quiet but devastating falling out with Michał Probierz. There were no violent outbursts, no viral training ground confrontations, no direct insults. Just an exhausted striker announcing he needed rest, and a manager who believed that request amounted to disrespect. The decision to strip Lewandowski of the captain's armband was not just a disciplinary choice, it was an act that cut straight into his sense of worth, a symbolic public denouncement. When Piotr Zielinski received the armband instead, the message could not have been clearer. Lewandowski, one of the most influential Polish players in the nation's history, found himself cast aside emotionally, and he responded with the one weapon that held true power: withdrawal. He retired from international football as long as Michał Probierz remained coach. And as soon as Poland's results dipped, when the team looked directionless without its greatest modern goal scorer, the question became painfully simple. One man had to go. No system, no ideology, no coaching project could outweigh the presence of a striker whose name alone could fill stadiums. Probierz resigned, and Lewandowski returned. A cycle of pride and capitulation that exposed the fragile hierarchy of national football. But long before that Polish fracture, another wound had already been carved into the heart of international football, one involving Hakim Ziyech and Vahid Halilhodžić. Their collision was not simply a disagreement over tactics, it was a clash of identity, pride, and national expectations. Halilhodžić called out Ziyech publicly, accusing him of faking injuries, lacking discipline, and showing disrespect during international duty. For a player already navigating the complicated pressures of dual footballing worlds belonging to a European club system while carrying the hopes of millions of Moroccans, those accusations were devastating. Ziyech did not just feel criticized, he felt attacked. And once relations were broken, there was no path back. The 2021 Africa Cup of Nations arrived without him. Morocco played, fought, and struggled. But the absence of their creative spark could not be ignored. When Ziyech walked away from the national team entirely, retiring at just 28, the crisis escalated into something much larger than a coaching disagreement. The Royal Moroccan Football Federation found itself confronted with a choice between a strict disciplinarian and a gifted player whose flair had become part of the nation's footballing soul. And when the coach was removed months before the World Cup, Walid Regragui stepped in and instantly reopened the door Ziyech once walked out of. The winger returned, and Morocco surged into the history books, reaching the semi-final of the 2022 World Cup, carrying both national pride and the proof that sometimes a single player can change the entire trajectory of a team. Yet drama is never a stranger in Spain, where egos shape the air as much as football itself. The sand beneath Barcelona trembled years earlier, when Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Pep Guardiola descended into a bitter rivalry disguised behind quiet stares and unspoken resentment. Guardiola, revered for his tactical genius and delicate footballing philosophy, had wanted Zlatan had given up Samuel Eto'o, a legend in his own right, to bring the towering Swedish striker to Camp Nou. For a brief moment, it seemed poetic. Guardiola's flowing system paired with Zlatan's brute force and instinct. But somewhere between expectation and execution, their relationship fractured. Ibrahimovic, accustomed to being the heartbeat of every attack, found himself drowning in the shadow of Lionel Messi, repositioned into a role that felt unnatural. Guardiola, seeking balance and discipline, saw Zlatan as a disruptive force that disrupts the fluidity he cherished. And then came the moment of blast after Barcelona's defeat to Inter Milan in the Champions League semifinal. Zlatan confronted Pep with an anger that had been simmering for months, telling him to go to hell and accusing him of cowardice. It was raw, visceral, unfiltered emotion. And from that moment, the club's choice was inevitable. Pep Guardiola had delivered historic success. Zlatan Ibrahimovic was gone before the dust settled, first on loan to AC Milan, then permanently sold. Barcelona did not hesitate. They chose philosophy over force, structure over chaos. That same club once faced a decision even bigger than that. But this time, the choice was not between coach and player. It was between Lionel Messi and Josep Maria Bartomeu, the president whose leadership Messi publicly questioned. Messi's message was not subtle. He wanted out if Bartomeu stayed. It was the first time the world truly witnessed the quiet internal war between loyalty to an icon and loyalty to institutional hierarchy. Messi was not simply a player. He was Barcelona's living myth, the embodiment of every era of success, the link between the club's identity and its global aura. As fans rioted, as media tore apart every rumor, as the walls of the Camp Nou echoed with the fear that the unthinkable would happen, the board finally collapsed under pressure. Bartomeu resigned. The institution itself had chosen its greatest son over the authority meant to lead it. If football is built on emotion, this moment proved it. No president, no board, no political machinery could stand against a player whose footprint was carved into the club's very skin. And yet, a few hundred kilometers north, another story was brewing years later, one far colder, more clinical, and imbued with the modern ruthlessness of elite football. Cristiano Ronaldo returned to Manchester United with the hope of rekindling a fairy tale. Instead, he walked straight into a collision course with Erik ten Hag. Their conflict was not about personality alone. It was about era, philosophy, and relevance. Ten Hag represented a new vision, a structured pressing system that demanded roles be followed with mathematical precision. Ronaldo represented the old flame, the superstar, who had built his identity on freedom and individual brilliance. When Ten Hag benched him repeatedly, the tension grew into something toxic. The boiling point came when Ronaldo refused to come on as a late substitute against Tottenham Hotspur, choosing instead to walk down the tunnel before the final whistle. For a player whose pride had built his legend, the humiliation was unbearable. For a coach trying to enforce authority, leniency was impossible. The dressing room split. Fans fought online. Analysts debated legacies. And Manchester United, caught between the icon who defined their past and the manager who was meant to shape their future, made their decision. They terminated Cristiano Ronaldo's contract. Ten Hag stayed. But in the aftermath, the team's struggles exposed the emotional gamble they had taken, choosing a new vision over the man who once carried the badge like armor. Across the Atlantic, in South America, far from the polished boardrooms of Europe, a much younger Neymar found himself at the center of a storm at Santos. This was 2010, long before the world associated his name with Parisian lights or Barcelona triangles. Neymar was still a rising star, electric and unpredictable. When Dorval Jr. chose another player to take a penalty Neymar had earned, the young forward's reaction was immediate, a public show of frustration, a refusal to accept the coach's authority. Dorival wanted to suspend him for 2 weeks as punishment. But Santos saw something different. The future, a generational talent too valuable to discipline harshly. They chose him over the manager without hesitation. Dorival was fired before he could enforce his punishment. It was one of the earliest and clearest signs of Neymar's influence. The moment his club proved that the promise of greatness can outweigh the need for strict structure. It was also a mirror held up to Brazilian football's complex relationship with young superstars. Discipline becomes delicate when brilliance is on the line. Years later, in England, a different kind of power struggle consumed Manchester United again, this time involving Mourinho and Paul Pogba. Mourinho had once adored Pogba, had brought him back to Old Trafford with visions of building the team around him. But admiration turned to conflict as their philosophy split. Pogba sought creative freedom, the license to roam and improvise. Mourinho demanded discipline, structure, and tactical obedience. Their tension seeped into training sessions and eventually erupted publicly in 2018, when cameras captured their frosty confrontation. Mourinho stripped Pogba of the vice-captaincy, a move that felt less like punishment and more like a calculated declaration of war. The dressing room fractured. The board watched nervously. And once again, Manchester United had to choose between a player whose presence was central to their identity and a manager whose methods had become polarizing. They chose Pogba. Mourinho was dismissed months later. The club prioritized their long-term investment in a charismatic star over the volatility of a manager whose tenure had become a battlefield. But today, a quiet war brews in Spain, one that feels as fragile as any before it. Xabi Alonso arrived at Real Madrid carrying the aura of innovation, bringing with him a vision of tactical intelligence and modern fluidity. But decisions have consequences. And when he sidelined young talents like Endrick and Rodrigo, whispers began. When Vinicius Jr. became visibly frustrated after being substituted during El Clasico, those whispers turned into waves. The relationship between Alonso and Vinicius, two men capable of defining the future of Madrid in different ways, grew tense. Reports began to spread that Vinicius had not signed his new contract, with some suggesting Alonso's presence was one of the reasons. Real Madrid, a club built on both tradition and ambition, now faces the same impossible dilemma that has haunted giants throughout football history. When two powerful figures collide, who remains? The coach with a fresh vision, or the player whose feet have already delivered trophies? These stories, scattered across continents and generations, reveal a truth football has spent decades trying to hide. Clubs do not simply choose between coach and player. They choose between identity and evolution, between emotional loyalty and the cold logic of success. When Zlatan Ibrahimovic confronted Pep Guardiola, it was not just a clash of personalities, it was a battle between two different philosophies of football. When Neymar challenged Dorval Jr., it was a test of a club's willingness to bet on youth over stability. When Cristiano Ronaldo clashed with Erik ten Hag, it was a war between legacy and modernity. When Hakim Ziyech stood firm against Vahid Halilhodžić, it echoed the tension between individual dignity and institutional authority. When Robert Lewandowski stepped away from the national team because he felt betrayed, it symbolized how easily pride can eclipse strategy. And when Lionel Messi forced the Barcelona board to confront their own failures, it showed that even entire leadership structures can fall before the weight of one man's legacy. In each of these cases, decisions carried consequences that lasted years. Morocco's choice to remove Halilhodžić opened the door to a historic World Cup run that redefined African and Arab representation on the global stage. Poland's choice to see Lewandowski return restored their hope and leadership. Santos' decision to fire Dorval Jr. helped accelerate Neymar's rise, but also signaled the beginning of a long-term pattern of indulgence that would follow him across his career. Barcelona's willingness to let Zlatan leave rather than disrupt Guardiola's system contributed to an era of football many still consider the most beautiful ever played. Manchester United's choices, however twice choosing differently in two different eras, became symbols of a club struggling to balance past glory with future ambition. And Real Madrid's current dilemma to join this long lineage of defining crossroads. What makes these stories powerful is not simply that conflict occurred, but that each conflict forced a club to reveal its values. Behind every decision lies a philosophy. Do you protect your star, believing that unforgettable moments on the pitch justify emotional turbulence off it? Or do you defend your manager, trusting that long-term structure is more important than individual brilliance? The world often sees these choices as simple, but they are far from it. They involve millions of dollars, years of planning, the emotions of fan bases, the size of nations, and the fragile chemistry of dressing rooms filled with ambition and ego. And the truth is, no matter how much football evolves, these confrontations will continue. As long as there are coaches with visions and players with pride, as long as the sport thrives on passion and identity, as long as victories are measured not only by goals but by aura, this delicate dance of power will remain part of the game's heartbeat. For every new coach who rises, there will be a player unwilling to be reshaped. For every prodigy who emerges, there will be a coach who demands obedience. And every club, no matter how big, how historic, or how wealthy, will eventually face the same question Real Madrid faces now. When the day finally comes, and the tension reaches breaking point, who will they choose? The man who draws the tactics, or the man who electrifies a stadium with every touch? Football has never had a universal answer, and perhaps that is why it remains the world's most emotional game, because every conflict becomes a story, every story becomes a legend, and every legend leaves the club forever changed. Tell me which side you would choose in each war. Name the one player you would have backed no matter what. Comment the club you think handles these battles the worst. Follow for the insider stories they never want published.